Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the unveiling of this beautiful and momentous statue. I'm Wendy Hirsch, president of the Roosevelt Island Disabled Association. I came aboard as president of the association after this endeavor had begun. But while I watched our former president, Jim Bates, strive relentlessly to have a statue completed depicting President Roosevelt as the person he was, I saw what a wonderful addition this would be, not only to South Point Park, but to Roosevelt Island in whole, in order to show others within our community, as well as all visitors to our island, that no matter what your disability or limitations are, you can still pursue your dreams and reach your goal and aspirations. During my tenure as president, I supported and assisted in its completion. I am so proud to be part of it. My hope, as well as Rita's hope, is that others with any type of disability might realize that they too can live the highest quality of life. I want to thank Meredith Bergman for creating such a magnificent statue, the committee created by Jim Bates for their time and work on this project, all the elected officials who supported us through this time, for Freedoms Park, as well as the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation for all their support in its completion and finding and agreeing on a perfect home for it. It is with great pleasure that Rita donates a statue to RIAC and Roosevelt Island as a reminder to all of not only President Roosevelt's contributions, but to show that a person's disability does not define him. Abled, but not disabled. Thank you.
Hello, friends. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thanks. Okay. How's that? Better, okay. Thank you. All right. Thanks for all those terrific speeches from those distinguished guests. It's great to see so many people here who've worked on the project. I'm wondering if any of you have the same feeling that I do, that we need one more permit before we can unveil the sculpture. So the sculpture has been in a box for about 8 months, but the timeline has been visible for everyone to see. And it begins in 2 branches. The first gives a history of the island from when it was acquired by New York City as a place to exclude part of its population from the rest, with institutions like the penitentiary, the asylum for the insane, and the smallpox hospital, which you can just see to your right. The second branch represents FDR's life. As you heard, it wasn't until he was 39 that he contracted polio. In addition to the paralysis in his legs, Roosevelt at first had some paralysis above his waist. He was unable to sit up or write. His first public appearance afterwards was 3 years later at the Democratic National Convention to give the nominating speech for president. To get to the lectern, he walked across the stage with crutches, slowly and awkwardly, but without the aid of another person. An incredible amount of hard work and perseverance was involved. The branches of the timeline come together as the stories do. People paralyzed by polio were treated both at FDR's Rehabilitation Center in the Warm Springs of Georgia and here on Welfare Island at Goldwater Hospital, which was a leader in polio care. Many people were kept alive here in iron lung machines, and it was at Goldwater where more advanced respirators were developed that allowed patients to become mobile. This connection to polio was a factor in the islands being renamed for FDR when it was converted to a residential community in the 1970s. One of the people who had been in an iron lung at Goldwater and who moved into one of the new apartment buildings became a respected member of the new community, and later the vice president of the Roosevelt Island Disabled Association. The story on the timeline is very much her story, my friend Nancy Brown. The island was years ahead of the Americans with Disabilities Act in providing features to accommodate people with physical disabilities, and some details go beyond today's ADA. At the crosswalks along Main Street, the sidewalks don't slope down to meet the streets. The street slopes up to meet the crosswalk. and you stay on level ground as you walk across the street. A generation of children who grew up here, including our kids in the 1990s, saw a great number of people in wheelchairs mingling with others on Main Street, and these children participated in the very natural inclusion and acceptance of that spectrum of abilities. That experience, along with the island's racial and economic diversity, must have helped form their worldviews. Welfare Island, all about exclusion, had rebranded as Roosevelt Island, this model of inclusion. So when FDR Four Freedoms Park was about to be built 12 years ago, and its design indicated nothing of this history or FDR's disability, the community cried out, led by Dr. Jack Resnick, who's been at the forefront in keeping alive the island's connection with FDR, along with people at Goldwater Hospital and the Disabled Association. The association's president, Jim Bates, or I should say Uncle Jim, reminded the island of its history and made us understand that Roosevelt's disability needed to be portrayed. Ambassador William Vanden Heuvel agreed with Uncle Jim. Ambassador Vanden Heuvel was the founder of Four Freedoms Park Conservancy and was the force behind the creation of the extraordinary Four Freedoms Park. The ambassador said that he never gave a speech about FDR's life without telling the story of his disability. He pledged a substantial grant of funds from the Conservancy toward a second project, this memorial. We miss Ambassador Vanden Heuvel's guidance and his presence here today. It is really an honor to have Katrina Vanden Heuvel speaking today as a member of the board of the Conservancy, but also as one of the nation's leading progressive voices. Her column in the Washington Post just this week expands on some of what she talked about today, the difficulties faced in this country by people with disabilities. The Conservancy remained very involved, especially its then president and now vice chair of the board, Sally Menard, who for years advocated for this project so effectively in so many ways, and its current president, Howard Axel, who has been exceptionally generous with avenues of collaboration and support. They are both here today also representing the Conservancy. Ambassador Vanden Heuvel's appreciation of Franklin and Eleanor may have started early in life. He was 2 years old when FDR became president, and it wasn't until he was 15 that FDR's presidency ended. My mother, who was born the same month as the ambassador, said that throughout her childhood, Roosevelt was the only president she had known. My dad was born earlier and was 19 when Roosevelt died. If you'd like a first-hand account of what it was like to have FDR as your president, ask my dad. He's 95 years old and he's here with us today in a wheelchair. Uncle Jim had a vision of a sculpture that would include FDR and a child with a disability, and he gave the FDR Hope Memorial its name. He brought together a committee of people, as you know, with an array of talents. In addition to Nancy, there's Ron Becker, Ellen Polivy, Faye Christian, and Gina Pilara, who was then the executive director of Four Freedoms Park and was central to the success of the committee's early efforts. Also Howard Polivy, Marilyn Atkins, Jonathan Calkin, and Jack Resnick, and Rick O'Connor, Archie Price, and Margie Smith. After a search for an artist, the committee selected Meredith. So as you know, Meredith later became the sculptor of the Women's Rights Pioneers movement in Central Park, which is the first sculpture in the park of real women, but we discovered Meredith first. Actually, Meredith was well known by then. Meredith easily connected with the values that we hoped the memorial would express as they matched her own. This work would add to a career exploring issues of human rights and dignity. Meredith also brought a personal understanding of disability concerns to the project, as her son has a challenging form of autism. He was not only an inspiration to Meredith, but Daniel would provide a perspective that remained present with us throughout the project. Jessica Laban was the city council member who secured major funding from the city of New York, and Manhattan resident Alice Heyman, the anonymous donor, contributed actually $150,000 to the project. And of course that was made possible by Rebecca Seawright, who at the time was and still is a great supporter of the project. At the first public reveal of Meredith's design, Micah Kellner, then our assembly member, spoke of the importance of the project. Our state senator, Jose Serrano, a longtime champion of the arts in New York, has been a supporter since when he took office. Our local community helped build momentum for the project. The Riva Art Gallery hosted that first public event. The Roosevelt Island Residents Association organized a resolution in support of the project, and Community Board 8 gave unanimous approval to the project. Our design team volunteered their professional services. The plaza was designed along with landscape architect Andrei Moravsky, whose knowledge, experience, and talent are unmatched and were invaluable to the project. Architects Anya Chugg and Will Garris developed three-dimensional computer models of the project that were used to study the design and generate renderings. The lighting designer Jack Bailey of One Lux Studio used the digital model to analyze a range of possible lighting strategies, settling on the simplest and most dramatic. And we'll have to come back here some evening to check that out. The graphic designer Abbott Miller, a partner at Pentagram, designed the lettering that you see throughout the plaza, as is fitting for their setting. They're elegant and dignified. The text of the timeline had contributions from the president and archivists, as you heard, of the FDR Presidential Library and Museum, Roosevelt Warm Springs in Georgia, and from our own Judy Birdie of the Roosevelt Island Historical Society. That group of wonderful people is our pro bono design team. The plaza where the sculpture stands, where I'm standing as well, is paved with the same white granite that's quarried in North Carolina as the stone at Fort Freeman's Park. And it's in the same running bond pattern of squares, reinforcing the connection between the two memorials. We lowered the area where I'm standing about a foot, so the slope up is more gentle. We reduced the number of benches, so there is room between the benches for people in wheelchairs to sit next to people on the benches. We were deliberate about seat heights, as Uncle Jim often advised that it's hard for some people to stand up from seats that are too low. Our design was reviewed by the Parks Department, the Public Design Commission, and the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. At the request of Parks, only some of the ends of the benches have armrests, so that some people can use the armrest for stability, and others who use assistance like walkers can easily transfer onto the bench. The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, also known thankfully as MOPD, suggested a guide path for the visually impaired, slots that are formed into the granite that will guide a person using a white cane. You can see the guide path running alongside the timeline from the entry to the site up here to the oval. MOPD was also concerned about a person who's visually impaired coming up the plaza right toward the center of the sculpture and bumping into the arms of FDR and the girl. To prevent that, we could have set the whole sculpture up on a plinth, but that would have prevented wheelchairs from getting close to the figures. Instead, we designed a curb in front that slopes back and fades into the plaza, allowing everyone to approach the figures from the far side and share the space with FDR and the girl, which was Meredith's intention. This accommodation for people with visual impairment is not common for public arts installations in the city. It was a goal of MOPD and Parks for this project to be a leading example of accessibility. The project might not have been completed for another dozen years if not for Michael Burden. Michael channeled his boundless cleverness toward repeatedly finding ways to unlock catch-22s and get ahead of potential obstacles. The project might never have been completed at all if not for Margie Smith, who conceived of REOC's adopting the effort as one of its own. Susan Rosenthal, REOC president at the time, loved the project and made this idea happen with the REOC board's enthusiastic approval. The project would not have been designed as beautifully as it is if not for Mary Ann Lau. The design team consulted with Mary Ann, drawing on her rare combination of great design ability and technical knowledge. Mary Ann's also my beautiful wife and the true architect in the family. The plaza would not have been constructed as beautifully as it is if not for Prince Shah, REOC's fantastic project manager. Prince calmly and confidently navigated the construction through all its hurdles and personalities. More than 24 people at REOC over the years devoted much of their energy to this project and became truly involved. They all, from finance to communications, can take credit and share in this accomplishment. In addition to unveiling a sculpture today, we are also dedicating this plaza. There is an inscription at the top of the oval behind me that names the plaza for two people who are not only the visionaries and the heart of this project, but also beloved members of the Roosevelt Island community. I now have the privilege to dedicate, as the inscription reads, the Uncle Jim Bates and Nancy Brown Plaza. So Uncle Jim passed away in 2017. By then the sculpture was complete and he knew it would eventually be installed here. He asked Wendy Hirsch if she would take over as president after he was gone. Wendy's career is devoted to helping others. She's got projects on the side that help others, and in her free time, Wendy's helping others. So of course she said yes to Jim, and she's been a terrific leader of the Disabled Association for the last several years. Our committee has not yet seen the bronze figures behind me, but we have seen the full-size clay figures, and we've watched Meredith's process with fascination. As Meredith knows, we are beyond thrilled with what she has accomplished and with the gift that she has given to all of us. The inscription in the timeline that marks the opening of this memorial brings the timeline up to the present. The last two entries are undated. The first reads, "The World Health Organization announces polio is eradicated globally." Though polio was eradicated in the US in 1977, the wild polio virus remains endemic in 2 countries. Currently, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative involves tens of thousands of staff, millions of volunteers, and billions of dollars in an effort to immunize every child on the planet. An incredible amount of hard work and perseverance is involved. The work suffered a setback last year due to COVID-19. In 2018, there were under 200 cases of polio. In 2020, there were more than 1,200. Last month, the initiative announced a new plan with a goal of 2026 for the eradication of the disease. When it's achieved, the date will be inscribed on that timeline entry. The last timeline stone will remain without a date. It is an aspiration. All communities become more like Roosevelt Island, accessible, inclusive, and welcoming. This goal too suffered a setback due to recent events, as our nation endured 4 years of a loud voice of intolerance and its viral spread through the country. If indeed everyone across America had grown up in communities more like Roosevelt Island, then they, like the island's children, might have been immunized against that virus. We are on a better track now, but to make progress, an incredible amount of hard work and perseverance is involved. This hard work is ours, to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, accessibility, and acceptance. The FDR Hope Memorial is one beautiful moment in that effort.
That was absolutely beautiful, Marc. Marc has been extremely instrumental in this project. I've learned so much about him and his efforts, as well as his wife, Marianne, who is the mastermind behind a lot of this. So thank you so much again, Marc Diamond, ladies and gentlemen.